Hello everybody, hope you're doing really well. Today I'm in Sandwich Bay, surrounded by a couple of golf courses. I know this area semi-well in terms of I've been across here a few times. And I've always wanted to cover this story, which is just in front of me. It's a sad story, but it also encompasses a paranormal tale as well. We're talking about the story of Mary Bax. Stay with me because it's really interesting. We're going to cover two different versions of the story. So stay with me and let's cover it. Come on. Hello everybody, hope you're doing really well. Welcome back. We are today in a glorious, beautiful day in the East Kent sort of side of the coast. And we're in Sandwich Bay, which is sort of just between Deal and Sandwich itself. It's glorious. It's where all the people play golf. There's a couple of golf courses here as well, and I'm sort of semi-familiar with the area. I've sort of been here a couple of times around here for a walk. In fact, it's quite nice actually to see people doing walks and runs around here, and I'm sort of going, I've done that. I think I only did, well, I know I did the walk once, but I've driven through here before as well. So familiar-ish, but not enough, because it's kind of one of these areas really that unless you need to get from A to B, you're not sort of driving here for any other reason really. So today we're doing the story of Mary Bax. Now, we're going to sort of cover two variations of this story because I think it's important to sort of tell basically the difference in the variations, which are that basically it's really the names and the people that were involved in it. So Mary Bax, let's talk about this sad story really. We're obviously at the site of where she was murdered and it's nice actually to sort of see everything still in situ. There was, I know at one point actually the sort of little plaque that is below the sort of stone had actually been taken away, but obviously it's now back or has been cleaned up or whatever the report of that is. But it's just nice to sort of see, and it does tell a really interesting story. So Mary Bax, let's talk about it. Mary Bax was really just an ordinary sort of like really run-of-the-mill woman. We could sort of say woman. And basically what happened was on the 25th of August 1782 she was walking along the ancient highway from Deal to Sandwich, and she was carrying a parcel which is about 100 yards beyond the Checkers Inn, which unfortunately isn't there anymore. Well, it sort of is. When she was apprehended by a Swedish sailor, Martin Lash, who demanded the parcel. She refused it, and in the struggle Mary Bax was struck many times and murdered, and her body concealed in a ditch, which is where we are. The murder was witnessed by a young boy described as the son of a looker in the marshes, and a looker was basically someone who was a shepherd. You get lookers' huts, for example. The boy ran back to Deal to raise the alarm, and then Martin Lash was eventually apprehended in Folkestone, asleep at the foot of one of the tombstones in the parish churchyard, still in possession of the stolen parcel. It transpired that he had deserted a ship whilst he was in the Downs, and he was taken to Maidstone jail and tried and executed. So that's the first variation of the story, which is the well-known story. So basically that is the story that Martin Lash, a sailor, had basically, as Mary was on her way, he'd sort of like seen her, noticed her, she was carrying a parcel. He obviously clearly was of no good ilk, if that makes sense, and basically he took it, and obviously, but he murdered her, and that was the thing about it. He actually murdered her just for a parcel, and he was spotted at Folkestone Cemetery when he was apprehended, which is really, very Kent-based story in the heart of Kent, and obviously got taken to Maidstone jail as well. So it's a very, it's a proper Kent story, this. It's kind of nice actually, because where we are located, it's beautiful really. I mean, like I said, I love this area. I mean, I love this whole side, and I wish really that there was more for me to sort of explore around here, but there isn't. I mean, the only other thing we could talk about is the World War II history. Stay tuned for some of that, maybe, for some of you. But yeah, it's remarkable. So what I want to now do is really, I want to sort of, as I do my stretches, what I want to do now is I want to tell you about the second story that pertains to this, or the alternative story related to Mary Bax. So let's do it. So the other version of this story pertains to a lover that Mary had called John Winter. And John Winter was, it was a beautiful romance by all accounts, and really what happened was that he'd fallen in love with Mary, and at the time of the crime, John's younger brother David had been on his way from a rowdy evening in the infamous smugglers haunt, the Checkers, which obviously we've spoken about, so obviously that pertains to the same route of the story. But like I said, these are characters now, and it was John's younger brother David who'd actually witnessed the brutal murder, and then David rushed back immediately and spilled out the horrific account to John, who became mad with grief and rage. And then really after that, it was a sort of, it transpires into sort of it sort of takes a different turn, so it becomes almost like a revenge tale then, where the alternative version then is obviously, so we've got our characters, let's just sort of say John and David, and obviously Martin. We've got our character obviously in Mary, and then what happens is that John he gets angry, and he basically goes out and tries to find this person that obviously David, his younger brother, had spotted, and basically just to bring the evildoer to justice. And they went searching for him night and day, and then eventually they found him and turned him into the authorities. And it was David, his young brother, who was able to identify him. And it was Martin, who was the killer, who was then hand close to where he'd murdered Mary. And then it was said that later that David Winter, the younger brother, had drowned, and then John went away for many years, only returning to deal when the events were all but forgotten. And then we say there that Mary's stone now rests on a levee among the long grass, which is true, just off the ancient road. And it was just interesting to sort of know that also, it says that local people say it's possible her body could have been taken back to Sandwich, from which the old Kent surname Bax originated from. So again, proper locality within that sort of name of Bax. So yeah, the two different versions then that I've sort of said to you about. So basically they could be really one and the same. However, the difference is that David in the first story doesn't exist. It's actually the name of it's actually, instead it is a younger boy, I think around the age of 13. Like we said before, he was obviously locally related to this area in terms of obviously the shepherd's hut, etc., etc. He'd witnessed it. On the other version, that David was the person who'd actually seen it, who happened to be the younger brother of John, who happened to be the lover of Mary. So you can sort of see that there's these two different versions. They could arguably be one and the same. However, there is a distinct difference between both, which again is not uncommon. And what happened is that because this was done so early in the sort of in 1782, even the date has actually been argued that it was probably 1783 or a year's difference, and actually the engraving might be wrong. That's another theory behind it as well. But on the engraving itself, it says on this spot, August 25th, 1782, Mary Bax, a spinster, aged 23 years old, was murdered by Martin Lash, foreigner, who was executed for the same. And that's what obviously you see, and that's what really the stone inscription does say, although it's very hard to read, hence why there's a different plaque on top as well. But remarkable really the fact of that you've got that, the actual spot where she was murdered. So again, now we need to ask what actually pertains to the haunting. Well, actually the haunting goes that Mary still haunts this area on this road. And you might spot her by having, just like I said, younger woman, carrying a parcel, walking along this road, disappearing. Typical sort of like paranormal aspect of the fact it's sort of like a road ghost, trying to find her lover, or trying to reenact the spot where she was murdered to try and point out where she was taken. I mean, so again, like I said, that paranormal folklore that ties into that is absolutely wonderful, really. I just find it so interesting when we sort of like come up with this, the fact that the murder then pertains to it. So the other thing I wanted to argue about this point was really, so why are there two different stories? Well, in historical context, we always have to sometimes argue the fact that the story sometimes gets spun and it gets changed over time. And then what happens is that sometimes they get romanticized, so a romantic element comes into place. Obviously, this is normally during the Victorian period when stuff like this happens, where they start basically telling an over glamorized story that this her lover John was around, and he sort of fell in love, and he had to seek revenge and find her, and all this sort of stuff. And that might be, for all accounts, partially true, but actually what we do know is that regardless, the main facts are that the two people involved, namely Mary and Martin, were the names are the same. The fact that he was taken to Maidstone jail was the same. The murder spot is exactly the same. Like I said, the only other interesting thing that might differ is actually that they've rumoured that the date might be about a year out, in terms of whether the date pertains to the murder or when it was actually put up, the actual stone itself. But really, I think we can just sort of like surmise that during 1782, this is where this event took place. There you go. What a fascinating story. I'm glad I've actually finally covered it for you. Hopefully I've done a really good job in terms of just sort of like illuminating this for you. Interesting enough now as well is that on Google Maps, if you use Google for your locations, this actual stone still is here, and hopefully you can come down here and check it out for yourselves and understand the story that pertains to. What we also have to bear in mind is actually the other thing that's common with both stories is actually she was brutally murdered. The other story also didn't mention, but there was also rumour that in a different version of it, that she wasn't murdered for a parcel, she was just brutally murdered, maybe for some sort of like sexual favour or something in that respect. Obviously, this is what stories do. Either way, the Checkers isn't too far, formerly what the Checkers pub is too far away. And the other thing to mention as well is when we're here is that it's so sad to see this. Not in the, you know, just the condition that it's in. I mean, you know, but again, it's just the fact that on that plot, it's really, I keep saying plot, I don't really know what we can sort of like call it really other than that. But the fact that, again, it does say, you know, on this spot, August the 25th, 1782, Mary Bax, a spinster, aged 23, was murdered by Martin Lash, a foreigner, who was executed for the same. So there you go. Well, look, in your more words of Phoenix history, thank you so much for coming along with me. Really hope you enjoyed that story. Feel free to spread the word of the channel. It goes a long way. I keep sort of saying I make no money from this. It's just a labour of love and a hobby. And more importantly, it's to encourage you to come down here and see these tales and these stories for yourself. So yeah, take care everybody. I think you know the drill by now. You ready? Kapow.